Statelessness affects millions of people around the world, denying them access to basic rights and social services. Since the launch of the I Belong campaign to eradicate statelessness by 2024, the United Nations Refugee Agency has helped Kazakhstan in identifying 6,500 refugees and stateless persons, of which 2,000 have already acquired a nationality. The representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Schodder, is on a working visit in Nur-Sultan and is joining me tonight for an interview. Mr. Schodder, thank you for joining. Central Asia is home to 95,000 refugees, asylum seekers and stateless persons. How does the UN Refugee Agency distinguish between these groups?
Thank you very much for having me. Now, the refugees, asylum seekers and stateless persons are completely different people. The refugees are the people who have to flee their homes because they are fearing persecution. Asylum seekers are those who want to, claim refugee status. And the stateless people, very often they have not even left their villages. They have been staying wherever they were, but they were just lacking the documents to show, what citizenship they have. And in Central Asia, the main reason for statelessness is, related to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and then, determining, what papers they have. Some of them, they forgot to exchange their Soviet passports. Some of them, were born in one republic and then they moved to another. Some of them have been living here all the time, but they never had the proofs to show that. So these are completely different people. And the number of refugees and asylum seekers is very small. Very, very small. In all of Central Asia, maybe we have less than 20,000. And most of them are in Tajikistan. And here in Kazakhstan, we have a very small number, only 370 refugees and 250 asylum seekers. Whereas the number of stateless people is much bigger. So it's completely different issues which need different solutions. And that's what we are engaging on.
Well, the United Nations Refugee Agency has launched an I Belong campaign to eradicate statelessness by 2024. Now, it's been a year since the start of the first statelessness identification campaign here in Kazakhstan. Could you tell us more about the campaign, what it has achieved, and how it will further proceed?
Now, the I Belong campaign, which was launched in 2014 by Antonio Guterres, who was then the High Commissioner for Refugees, now is the Secretary General of the United Nations, it basically brought states together who said, let's try to end statelessness within 10 years, by 2024, everywhere. Central Asia is in a good position to achieve that, which is wonderful, which is why one of the many reasons why I'm so happy to be here. And Kazakhstan is amongst the countries who can achieve that. And you mentioned the campaign, here the identification campaign is going very well. Now it's been running for a year. And within 1 year, actually, there was 7,000 people were already identified. And most of them have already received some papers. I mean, most of them could show that they actually, or were determined that they're actually Kazakh citizens, so they became citizenship papers, and 1,600 were determined to be stateless, so they got papers as stateless persons. So if we continue at this speed, and if we keep the momentum and the political will, we can actually end statelessness in Kazakhstan within the next 3 years, hopefully, and that would be a great achievement.
And why is documenting these people as stateless important?
Well, more important is to document people as citizens. So it's really important to see that, actually these people who didn't have documents are citizens of Kazakhstan and they get the papers and then they have all the rights like all of us. And to document somebody as a stateless person is just a temporary measure to provide them with some status, some papers, and access to some rights. But in most countries, like in Kazakhstan, after 5 years, they can also apply for citizenship if they can't, get it somewhere else. So eventually, they will also, become citizens, hopefully, and so it's just a temporary measure.
Do you see any hurdles, legal or procedural barriers to documenting these people?
Yeah, it's a very complicated process because, you have to show that they're not, for stateless people, you have to show that they're not citizens of any country. So very often you need to get documents from far away, from these governments saying that this person is not a citizen of my country, before they can be, determined to be stateless. So it can take years, and it can be very, very laborious. It can also be quite expensive. So we are paying or reimbursing a lot of these fees for the people or the lawyers who are engaged. Very often because the people don't have papers, they can't go themselves to the consulate because they can't travel without papers. So then, we commission lawyers to do it on their behalf. To get the paperwork sorted out. And sometimes when you meet stateless people and you look at their files like this thick of papers, so it's a very cumbersome and complicated process. Now here in Kazakhstan, legislation has been improved, the procedures have been improved, and so it's much easier now than it was, let's say, and then I think, it can be solved.
So stateless people are oftentimes denied access to social services because they don't have any documents on them. And so they now face a greater challenge during the pandemic, having no access to medical or healthcare services. How do we ensure that equitable vaccination is sort of secured in Kazakhstan, but also these people are given access to healthcare that they need?
So this is one of the reasons why it's so important to do an identification campaign and to provide, the citizens with papers proving that they're citizens, the stateless people with papers that they're stateless. Once they have the statelessness passports and documents, they have access to healthcare like a citizen. So there's no issue. At the same time, as long as they have no papers, of course, we need special measures. And we've been asking governments to provide special measures to people without papers so that they can also get vaccinated, that they also get access to healthcare. And I must say that a few months ago also the Ministry of Health here in Kazakhstan issued an order where it said, you don't need an IN anymore to get access to free of charge vaccination. Even undocumented people without an IN, and stateless people would be like that, they can come and they can get their COVID vaccination free of charge in our healthcare service, which is fantastic, which is exactly what was needed. And hopefully it will help not only to safeguard the health of these people, but also to safeguard the health of the whole nation, because the more get vaccinated, the better.
Mr. Schodder, let's talk about the refugees. Who are the refugees of Central Asia, and what is their average profile?
A big majority of the refugees in Central Asia are from Afghanistan. And like in Tajikistan, 95, 98% maybe. Kazakhstan the same. Now the ones in Kazakhstan, like I mentioned, we have only 370 refugees and 250 asylum seekers. Most of them have been living in Kazakhstan for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years already. They originate from Afghanistan, but they have integrated here, culturally completely. So the issue now is through the asylum procedures and the refugee status, that they first, they're being, well understood, and also issues of national security are being addressed. The authorities know very well who they are, and that then they get access to the rights so that they can contribute to our economic development. Because, they need to, they should not only work in the grey economy, they should pay taxes, they should pay pension contributions, they should have access to health insurance, all these issues.
Now, Mr. Schodder, 68% of the world's refugees come from only 5 countries, including Afghanistan. And Afghanistan already has 3.5 million people who are internally displaced, with 500,000 of them being displaced since the start of this year only. Now, with the regime change in Afghanistan, how big is the risk of an increased refugee crisis?
It hasn't happened yet, as you know. And we are really, together with other humanitarian agencies, massively engaged in Afghanistan to try to prevent, a humanitarian catastrophe. You know that there's many factors there. There's drought, there's the war, which, now is hopefully over. There is pandemic, all different issues. And this needs to be addressed very urgently, very, very urgently, so that, people will not, flee Afghanistan, or we don't have to flee Afghanistan. At the same time, we're making preparations with all the neighboring countries. How can we support them in case refugees would come? And then also we support them to deal with the Afghans who are already there. Because when you look at, for example, the Afghans, a very small number of Afghans we have in Kazakhstan, I mentioned already. They've been here for many years. When you look at the Afghans in Tajikistan, I mentioned also they've been there for many years. So let's try to, deal with them now, because they can't go home now at the moment. So they need some temporary solution. And then asylum and refugee status is the best solution because it's best for the national security. Because these people will be properly screened and documented and so on. So that's the kind of 3-track approach. Help Afghanistan, help countries prepare if there would be new refugees coming, and help countries deal with the Afghan citizens which are already here and which cannot, go anywhere at the moment, that they will be safe and we will be safe.
Mr. Schodder, 73% of the world's refugees, when displaced abroad, usually live in countries neighboring their countries of origin. And going back to Afghanistan, with the increased threat of a larger amount of refugees and their influx into the neighboring countries, how can the governments of Central Asia become more proactive in ensuring humanitarian assistance and also preventing the looming crisis?
Well, I think they're very active. I think they are very active from what I can say, and they're all trying very, very hard. And they're trying to provide humanitarian aid, which is very much needed. Also infrastructure, that Afghanistan relies on electricity from Central Asia, much of that, that should not be disrupted. There is all the transport links. Then there is support to the international community, like to the UN, to do our humanitarian job there. So I think that the countries in Central Asia are all very much aware of it, and they're trying very hard to help in stabilizing the situation. If there is any future refugee outflow, you see the biggest number will not come to Central Asia. It will again, like in the past, be Pakistan and Iran, have reasons, I guess, to be more worried, because as we saw in the past, most of the Pashto will go to Pakistan, and most of the Shia and Hazara will go to Iran. So Central Asia will, like in the past, not be at the center of this, but still I think that we should really work together with the governments, and the governments are working together, as you know, also to be prepared and to be constructive and to help Afghanistan to overcome this crisis.
Central Asia is home to some of Afghan citizens who are living or perhaps studying here, and amid the changes that are happening in their countries. And naturally, some of them would want to stay or seek asylum or seek new citizenships. What are the prospects for these people?
Well, for the time being, we have been asking all governments all around the world, including in Kazakhstan, not to deport any Afghans, to send them back home. And they're not doing it. And also here, It's very clear. It's not possible at the moment, and it would not be good to do it. So we will have to find some temporary solutions for them. And of course, if they wish to, they can apply for asylum. If that is the best solution. In terms of national security, it's the best solution, because then they go through a really, careful process of vetting, of screening. I think now many countries, they just, unbureaucratically extend visa for the time being, and they provide them with access to asylum track. And then eventually, of course, like all refugees, they want to go home. And refugees always want to go home. So if it's possible for them to go home, we will support them in going home. And if it's possible, if they cannot go home and they, prefer to stay here, then we should try to integrate them in our society.
Now, the UNHCR is committed to sort of help build self-reliance among the refugees in their host countries. Why is it important that that refugees learn to become self-reliant? Does that help ease some of the pressures for the host country, and how is that achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a win-win situation for everybody involved. If we imagine how it is to be a refugee, you lose your home, you come to a foreign place, a strange place. You might be traumatized from what you experienced. Maybe you saw loved ones or people suffering, dying, and you need to get the opportunity to start a new life, both psychologically and physically. And self-reliance, of course, is important, because that gives you the dignity. You don't rely on humanitarian aid. You work for your own life. And it's a win-win for the host country as well, because the host country doesn't want to invest for years and years and years into these people, but the host country is interested that they very quickly become responsible members of society, that they pay taxes, that they are able to pay for their rents, that they are able to send their children to school and so on, like all of us. So it's in everybody's interest. And that's why it's so important that we provide them with the access to the rights, the counseling, everything they need to start a new life, and that will be in the interest, first and foremost, of the host country.
So integrating these people is in the interest of the host country. Give us some of the positive sort of examples that are happening here in Central Asia of these people getting more and more integrated in the societies. I know one example is the Kazakh National University offering a student grant for refugee students specifically. What are some of the interesting examples that inspire you?
It's amazing. I mean, I spent the last few weeks meeting a lot of refugees and asylum seekers, and the stories they tell you are just amazing. And what they do, how to, to contribute to our society. There's athletes, there is business people, there is creative people, and there's caring people. Imagine, Europe, where the population gets older. They cannot sustain the whole care sector without, the support of refugees. So this is something which is important for everybody, I think. And we have so many examples of refugees who have inspired, also other people, and vice versa. The main thing refugees really want is to become part of our society. And we are well advised to give them that opportunity.
Mr. Schodder, what are some of the prevailing attitudes towards refugees and asylum seekers, but also stateless persons in Central Asia and particularly in Kazakhstan? And what are some of the ways of sort of increasing awareness and building more positive attitudes towards these groups of people?
It's very difficult to generalize because very often, and that's the right way, refugees are not seen as refugees. They're just seen as you and me, as human beings, and, they're judged by that. And stateless people also, they're invisible. They're called the invisible people. They might not have papers, but when you go out on the street, how do you know who has papers, who has not? So it's very difficult to generalize in this question. But I think that what we see everywhere is that those citizens who don't have any contacts with refugees or stateless people, they're more prone to be negative because they get maybe misinformation and so on. And those who, actually personally know refugees or stateless people, they are much more sympathetic because they understand the problem better. So I think it's good that, we also let the refugees, let the stateless people speak for themselves, so that we see them as fellow human beings without any stigma. And of course, they're like you and me. There is good and bad, there is smart and not so smart. And when you feel this, when you see this, then I think you lose any prejudice or fear you might have.
Mr. Schodder, thank you.
Thank you very much.